In the cold expanse of deep space, a signal reverberated through the silence. It wasn't like any known transmission the Galactic Empire had ever intercepted. It didn't come from an advanced civilization or an established galactic power, but from a remote star system light years away, the Sol system, a place no one thought worth looking at. The Empire's vast fleet traversed the cosmos with ease, and its empire stretched across thousands of star systems. But in all those years, no one had ever seen fit to venture this far out. The signal first appeared as a static burst, then quickly formed into a rhythmic pattern and irregular cadence, with strange pulses beneath the surface, faint but undeniable. It was like a song from an alien world, a series of repeating signals breaking through the quiet black nothingness. It caught the attention of the Empire's surveillance network, normally designed to monitor the movements of rival fleets and major galactic empires. This signal was nothing like the usual diplomatic chatter or military codes. The fleet often intercepted this with something different, something raw and unrefined, but undeniably deliberate. The Empire's flagship, the Vexor, a colossal ship built for command and domination, began its journey toward the source of the signal, the human world called Earth. The thought of a species that had never been explored by any other civilization in the galaxy intrigued the high command of the Empire. They assumed it was a small, insignificant planet, possibly on the brink of destruction, some primitive society struggling to survive. What if this signal was any indication? These humans were sending out something far more complex than expected. Captain Sereth, the commander of the Vexor, paced along the sleek metallic halls of his ship, his mind racing with possibilities. The Empire had never encountered a race like this. The signal was odd and unfamiliar. Surely it would be easy to silence whatever creature or people had dared to transmit to them. The Empire had crushed entire civilizations in moments, and this would likely be no different. Their advanced weaponry was unrivaled, their technology incomprehensible to lesser races. Yet something about this signal unsettled Sereth. It was unlike any communication they had ever received, and it stuck with him like a question mark. He couldn't shake it from his thoughts. He dismissed it as a strange anomaly, perhaps a mistake, or even a failed signal from a forgotten satellite. But that question lingered. Was this world just another insignificant planet, or was there something more to these humans than met the eye? The Vexor entered the outskirts of the Sol system, and Sereth observed the blue planet below Earth. It seemed so fragile and small from orbit, its atmosphere thick with clouds, but he could see human-made structures dotting its surface. Their cities sprawled across vast continents, their war machines hidden beneath layers of dirt and rubble. The sight of their primitive technology gave him little concern. Their weapons were laughable compared to the might of the Empire. Still, the signal had been purposeful. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this world than anyone realized. His orders were clear: make contact with the humans, find out what they were, and if they posed any threat to the Empire, eliminate them swiftly. Sereth turned to his crew. As the Vexor descended deeper into Earth's atmosphere, they were ready for whatever came next. But even as they closed in on the planet, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of people these humans were, and what lay beneath their unassuming exterior. The Vexor descended through the dense layers of Earth's atmosphere, with ease, its engines humming softly in the background. As the great ship glided into position above the surface, Sereth stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the planet below, the blue oceans and green lands, a strange beauty for such a primitive world. But he pushed those thoughts aside. He had a mission to complete. The humans were not to be underestimated, but neither were they worthy of mercy. As the Empire's ships slowly approached the surface, the Vexor's sensors detected no immediate threats, no organized defense systems, no fleets of warships, but something about the planet's atmosphere kept their sensors buzzing erratically. Sereth ordered the fleet to drop lower, scanning for any signs of resistance, but even as they did, the Empire's vast weapons systems remained idle, waiting for the command to fire. They found no evidence of anything larger than primitive surface defenses scattered here and there, a few crude radars and outdated anti-aircraft weapons scattered across the lands. They were nothing compared to the advanced technology of the Empire. These were the last defenses of a species caught in a desperate struggle for survival. Nothing more. The Vexor could crush them with a single strike. Yet as the ship cruised closer to the Earth's surface, something unexpected happened. The signal they had detected earlier flared once again, stronger this time. It was not just a message, it was a direct challenge. The hum of energy filled the air before the ship's systems began to sputter and flicker. It was subtle, at first a small disturbance, but then it grew stronger. The captain's eyes narrowed as the ship began to shake in response to the sudden pulse of energy originating from the planet below. It took only seconds for the Vexor to realize what was happening. A sudden barrage of missile fire erupted from below, cutting through the atmosphere and aiming straight for the ship's hull. Serath's hands flew to the control panel as he ordered evasive maneuvers, but it was too late. Several missiles struck the ship's outer shields with a resounding crash. The Vexor rocked violently in the air as the force of the impact reverberated through its metal frame. The crew scrambled to maintain control, panic beginning to spread throughout the ship's lower decks. Serath's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the damage displayed on the main screen. This was no primitive attack. This was a calculated response from a race that had no right to fight back. Yet here they were fighting with everything they had. Their missiles, small and crude, but clearly well-timed and effective. It was an unprecedented move, an unexpected strike from a planet that had no business challenging the might of the Galactic Empire. But the humans were relentless, and this was only the beginning. The Vexor's weapons officers scrambled to return fire, but Serath held his hand up for them to wait instead. His eyes scanned the screen, trying to get a read on the attack. Was it a mistake, a fluke? Or was this humanity's only hope of survival, their willingness to fight back against overwhelming odds? Serath was starting to think this was not an isolated incident, but part of a greater pattern, a way of thinking ingrained in their very nature. The humans didn't just survive, they resisted. And from that resistance, there was something Serath couldn't quite place. The Empire had never seen a species like this, not one that fought back against destruction with such savagery. Serath clenched his fists. He had assumed this mission would be a formality, that they would crush the humans in a few short hours. But now that certainty was fading quickly. It was clear that whatever humanity lacked in technology, they made up for in tenacity, and that could prove to be more dangerous than any weapon the Empire possessed. The Vexor struggled to regain stability after the barrage of missile fire from Earth's surface. The shields had absorbed most of the damage, but the impact had left a noticeable dent in the ship's outer defenses. Serath stood frozen at the helm, staring at the damaged sensor readouts, his mind racing. The humans had done something no one had expected. They had fought back with ferocity and cunning, and the damage was real, not a mere malfunction, but a genuine strike that sent ripples through the Empire's arrogance. Serath ordered the fleet to break formation and take a defensive stance around the Vexor, just in case Earth's missile barrage was only the beginning. The humans might have something else up their sleeves, something more than just these crude weapons. But he couldn't help but wonder why they had attacked in the first place. Hadn't they seen the size of the fleet above them? Couldn't they understand the futility of their resistance? Serath's thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his chief weapons officer, speaking urgently through the comms. "Captain, incoming craft from the surface." The officer reported. The words were almost incredulous. A small fleet of primitive ships had launched from Earth's surface. They were clunky, unrefined machines, barely capable of space travel, but the officer's tone betrayed a new realization. These ships were heading directly for the Vexor. For a moment, Serath stared at the digital display of the incoming fleet, his gaze fixed on the primitive ships hurtling toward them. Most of them were small and poorly constructed, almost laughable in their simplicity. But as they drew closer, Serath could see the clear signs of human determination. These weren't mere ships, these were a last-ditch effort to fight against an overwhelming power. They were desperate, and that desperation made them more dangerous than Serath had imagined. The lead ship approached rapidly, closing the distance as it locked on to the Vexor. With unexpected precision, it launched a series of small but well-coordinated missiles, which exploded against the Imperial fleet's shields. The damage was minor, but it was the tactics that set the humans apart. They were not fighting like an inferior species. They were fighting like a cornered animal, with instinct and survival guiding their every move. "Prepare to return fire," Serath barked the order to his weapons officers as the Empire's fleet moved into position. The Vexor unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, targeting the lead human ship, but the human pilots were skilled in a way that could not be explained by technology alone. They evaded the fire with nimbleness and precision. Sereth's frustration began to grow. This was no accident. The humans were learning quickly, and their ability to adapt was becoming evident. The Vexor's shields flickered under the constant barrage from the human ships, but they held strong as the battle continued. Sereth's crew engaged in a tense back and forth with Earth's defenders, but with every attack, the humans seemed to learn from their mistakes. They adjusted their strategies, changed their tactics, and struck again before the Empire could recover. The humans were not surrendering. They weren't retreating. They were escalating the conflict as if it were their only hope for survival. Sereth watched in disbelief as the battle unfolded before him. The human ships were equipped with only the most rudimentary weapons, yet their use of those weapons was masterful. They fought not because they had the superior technology or firepower, but because they were willing to sacrifice everything to protect their world, and that made them a far more dangerous opponent than anyone had anticipated. "What is this?" Sereth muttered under his breath as he watched a human fighter weave between blasts from the Imperial ships, dodging with such skill that it was almost impossible to track its movements. His mind couldn't fully comprehend the scene unfolding before him. The human race wasn't simply resisting, they were actively challenging the Empire's power and showing a level of tactical brilliance that no one had believed possible from such a primitive species. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Vexor and the rest of the Imperial fleet had underestimated humanity's greatest weapon, their will to fight, and the lengths they were willing to go to in order to protect everything they held dear. It was a force the Empire had never seen before, and as Sereth watched the tide of the skirmish begin to shift in favor of the humans, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The battle in space was relentless as the Vexor and the human ships traded fire above Earth, the small blue planet now the epicenter of an unforeseen conflict. Despite the Empire's overwhelming firepower, the humans continued to adapt and counterattack with an intensity that surprised even the most seasoned commanders aboard the Vexor. It became clear that this was not a typical confrontation. The humans weren't fighting like a people on the brink of annihilation. They were fighting like they had something to protect, something worth preserving at any cost. Sereth stood at the helm, his face a mask of tension as he watched the chaotic battle unfold on the screens. The Imperial fleet had taken minor damage from the human fighters, but it was clear now that brute force would not be enough to crush this resistance. These humans, with their simple ships and primitive technology, had something far more dangerous on their side, a relentless will to survive. The captain was a strategist, and he knew that to defeat a foe like this, it was not enough to destroy their cities or their ships. The human spirit, their ability to adapt and fight even when the odds were overwhelmingly against them, was something that needed to be understood. "Bring us down to the surface," Sereth commanded. "We need to know what we're dealing with." His decision was not without risk. The Empire's protocols were clear. First contact was to be handled from orbit, with immediate domination of any hostile force. But Sereth had seen enough to recognize that this was not a simple conflict. The humans had a strength far beyond their weapons, and that strength needed to be understood before further action could be taken. The Vexor began its descent toward Earth, breaking through the atmosphere with a controlled, silent grace. The ship's engines hummed with power, and the planet below seemed to grow larger with every passing second. The once peaceful blue orb was now a battlefield, but Sereth's mind wasn't focused on the violence above him. He was thinking of what he had seen on the sensors, of the raw, unyielding determination that these humans had shown. He needed to know more about them. The Vexor landed in a remote region far from the human cities, where the effects of the battle above hadn't reached yet. Sereth and a small contingent of his officers exited the ship, stepping onto the Earth's surface. The air was thick and warm, unlike anything they had experienced in the Empire's controlled environments. Despite the war that raged above, there was an eerie calm here, a sense of peace that contrasted sharply with the chaos in the skies. As Sereth and his team moved through the terrain, they came across signs of human ingenuity. Makeshift shelters built from scrap metal, remnants of old machinery repurposed for survival, and evidence of a people that had fought wars for centuries. This was not a species that had simply stumbled upon space travel. These humans had survived through sheer willpower, through endless adaptation to an ever-changing environment. This was a race forged in the crucible of hardship, and it was clear now that they had far more to offer than their primitive weapons. They soon discovered a small underground facility, a relic of the past. Inside, the walls were lined with old human texts and blueprints, most of them incomprehensible to Serath and his officers. But one piece of technology caught their attention, an ancient device, a map of the stars that seemed to show pathways across the galaxy. It was rudimentary, yet undeniably advanced for a species that had only recently discovered space travel. What struck Serath the most was a symbol etched into the side of the device, a symbol that matched a pattern seen in ancient imperial records, a reference to a long-forgotten prophecy of a species that would stand against the Empire. As Serath studied the map, he began to understand. The humans had not just fought wars on their own planet. They had faced threats from beyond their stars. This device, along with the other ancient texts, suggested that they were not as isolated as the Empire had believed. They had once been part of a larger galactic network, possibly scattered across the stars. But something had happened, something that had caused them to retreat, to hide away on this small, forgotten world. And now, they were fighting not just for their planet, but for their place in the galaxy. Serath's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. A human emerged from the shadows. A young woman, perhaps in her 20s, with the unmistakable fire of someone who had survived the worst. She held a weapon, but it was not pointed at Serath. Instead, she stood firm, eyeing him with an intensity that suggested she had no fear, no doubt that she would survive whatever came next. "You've come for Earth," she said, her voice steady. "But we're not the ones you should fear." Serath felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't understand yet, but he knew one thing for sure. The humans weren't just defending their planet. They were preparing for something bigger, something beyond even the Empire's comprehension. And now, for the first time, Serath wondered if the Empire had made a grave mistake in underestimating them. The young woman's words hung in the air like a challenge, her gaze unwavering as she studied Serath and his officers. The calm of the Earth's surface seemed to fade into something darker, more dangerous. Serath's mind raced. This human, standing before him, was no ordinary civilian. She had seen war, had experienced the trials of survival that had made her world what it was today. The question was, what exactly was she warning him about? "Who are you?" Serath asked, his voice steady but edged with curiosity. "I'm someone who's seen what you can do," she replied. "And I'm someone who knows what's coming." The woman lowered her weapon slightly but kept it close, as if ready to act at a moment's notice. She didn't seem afraid. If anything, she seemed certain. Certain of her world, certain of her people, and certain that the Empire's forces were not going to crush them as easily as they had hoped. Serath could see the hardened resolve in her eyes. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a leader, and she carried with her something more dangerous than weapons: knowledge. "We've been preparing for you," she continued, her voice low but firm. "Not just for your invasion, but for something much worse." Serath narrowed his eyes, his mind working through the implications of her words. What could she possibly mean? The Empire was the greatest power the galaxy had ever known. No force could stand against it. Not the weak, not the fractured civilizations. Yet here she was, standing unflinching before the most powerful military in the galaxy, speaking as if her people already knew what was coming. "And what exactly is coming?" Serath asked, his voice sharp now. She looked at him, as if weighing how much to reveal. "Not all of us are human, Captain," she said, her words heavy with meaning. "There are races out there, races you don't know, forces you've never encountered. They've been watching Earth for a long time, watching us grow. And now that the Empire has shown itself, they know it's time to strike. Sereth's mind reeled. Non-human races? Was she talking about ancient enemies of the Empire, races that had once threatened the galaxy before being driven into the shadows? For centuries, the Empire had dominated the stars, enforcing its will upon countless worlds. Yet, if what this woman said was true, the humans weren't merely fighting to protect their world. They were fighting for their place among the stars, a place that had been denied to them for centuries. He studied her closely. "You expect me to believe this," he said, a skeptical edge creeping into his voice. She nodded solemnly. "You don't have to believe me. You'll see for yourself soon enough. The galaxy has a way of balancing things out, and the humans have a role in that balance. But it's not just us you're fighting anymore. The Empire's greed has awakened forces you can't control." Her words sent a shiver through Sereth, a cold realization creeping into his chest. Was this why the humans had resisted so fiercely? Were they preparing for something beyond the reach of the Empire, something that could bring even its mighty fleet to its knees? The thought sent a ripple of doubt through him. The Empire had always prided itself on its ability to crush any resistance. But this woman, this human, had spoken with such conviction that for the first time, Sereth questioned if they were truly in control of this situation. "You're telling me there's more to this than just us," Sereth said quietly. "Much more," she replied, her tone grim. "And we've been trying to warn the galaxy, trying to prepare it for what's coming. But now, with you here, you've brought the Empire's wrath to our doorstep. And you've made the worst mistake of all. You've drawn attention to us, to Earth." Sereth paused, taking in her words. Despite himself, he found himself wondering if she was telling the truth. Was it possible that the humans, in their struggle for survival, had uncovered knowledge the Empire had overlooked? Could they have found something hidden in the universe, something that could shift the balance of power? Before he could speak again, another voice rang out from behind him. One of his officers, clearly unsettled, came forward. "Captain, we're detecting unusual energy fluctuations in the atmosphere, massive spikes of power coming from Earth's surface. It's not natural. It's as if they've activated something." Sereth's heart skipped a beat. He turned to the officer, his mind racing. Had the humans discovered some ancient technology, something the Empire had long since forgotten? Had they been preparing something far beyond the missiles and ships that had so far proven to be nothing more than a nuisance? "What are you saying?" Sereth demanded. "The energy, it's growing," the officer replied, his voice trembling. "And it's headed straight for us." A deep sense of dread settled over Sereth as he realized the implications. The humans weren't just trying to fend off an invasion. They were preparing to fight something far larger than the Empire. Something that could change the entire course of history. "You need to leave now, Captain," the woman said, her voice almost pleading now. "This is bigger than you think. You've already woken them up. Now, it's too late to stop what's coming." Sereth didn't know what she meant by them, but he knew one thing for certain. Earth had just become the most dangerous place in the galaxy. Sereth's mind raced, the weight of the human woman's words pressing down on him like a crushing storm. His officers were already reporting increasing energy spikes, readings that didn't make sense, that were beyond anything the Empire had ever encountered. His pulse quickened as the realization set in. This wasn't just a skirmish with a primitive race. The humans had something powerful, something the Empire had never anticipated. "Captain," one of his officers said, urgency in his voice, "the energy readings, they're coming from all over the planet. It's spreading. This is no localized event." Sereth stared at the holographic display, his mind churning with the possibilities. It was happening faster than they could react. If what the human woman had said was true, if the galaxy was truly on the brink of something far more dangerous than the Empire had ever imagined, then the Vexor and its fleet could be on the verge of facing an enemy they were entirely unprepared for. "Alert the fleet," Sereth ordered, his voice low and steady. "We need to prepare for an evacuation. If Earth has the means to do what we think it does, We won't be able to hold our position for long." As the order was relayed, Serath's mind turned to the woman who had warned him. She wasn't lying. He could see it in her eyes. The cold, unwavering conviction. She knew something that had eluded the Empire for centuries. He had to know more. He turned to her, stepping closer, but she didn't flinch. She just stood there, waiting. "You said we've woken them up," Serath said, his voice tight with the weight of what he feared was coming. "Who are they? And what do you mean by it's too late?" The woman's face was drawn with exhaustion, but there was a spark of determination in her eyes. "The them I'm talking about are ancient beings," she said quietly. "They've watched over Earth for longer than you could imagine. And now, with the Empire's presence here, they're about to make themselves known. They're not your typical alien races. No, these beings have power that you can't fathom. You've triggered something by coming here, something that was hidden beneath your radar, buried in the deep Earth itself. And now, they're waking up. And it won't be just your fleet they're after. They'll come for everyone." Serath felt a chill spread down his spine. Ancient beings, what kind of power do they wield? The woman hesitated, her voice soft but grave. "The kind of power that reshapes the stars. The kind of power that can wipe entire fleets out of existence. We've barely survived their last awakening. But this time, with the Empire's fleet here, there's no going back. You've made your presence known, and they won't forget that. They don't fear your weapons. They don't fear anything." Serath felt a cold realization spreading across his chest. The Empire was not facing an ordinary adversary. The strength of these beings, these unknown entities, was something beyond the grasp of Imperial might. This wasn't a battle for territory or resources. This was something deeper, older, more insidious. And somehow, the humans were involved, or perhaps even central to it. He was about to press the woman for more answers when an explosion rocked the ground beneath them, shaking the Vexor's landing site. Dust and debris filled the air as Serath's officers scrambled to their feet, weapons drawn. The ship's emergency alarms began to blare, signaling incoming threats. "Captain, we have incoming," another officer shouted. The ground trembled again, this time more violently. From above, a strange, shimmering light streaked through the atmosphere. A beam of energy so bright that it nearly blinded Serath. He shielded his eyes instinctively, watching as the light expanded, forming a vast arc of power that seemed to radiate from every corner of the planet. It was as if Earth itself was alive, responding to the chaos above with its own fury. This was no simple attack. It was a signal, a call to arms. The woman's expression darkened as she stepped forward, her voice low but urgent. "You need to leave now. There's no more time for explanations. The them are already here, and they've come for you." Serath turned to his crew, his mind torn between military protocol and the overwhelming sense that they were out of their depth. His duty to the Empire called for decisive action, but this was beyond anything his training had prepared him for. Earth was no longer just a planet to be subdued. It was a battlefield for something far greater. And in that moment, Serath realized something that made his stomach twist with unease. The Empire had made a critical miscalculation. They hadn't just underestimated the humans. They had underestimated the forces that had been lying dormant on Earth, waiting. "Get back to the Vexor," Serath ordered. "Prepare for immediate departure. We don't know what we're up against, but we're not sticking around to find out." As the crew rushed to comply, the woman's voice rang out, pleading one last time. "It's already too late for that. You've already drawn them here. There's no escaping now. Not for any of us." Serath's heart pounded in his chest as he looked back at the glowing light in the sky, knowing deep down that the true battle had only just begun. The ground beneath Serath's feet continued to tremble as the eerie light intensified. It was no longer just a streak of energy in the sky. It had become a massive, swirling vortex, a disturbance that seemed to draw the very essence of Earth into its grasp. As the Vexor's crew rushed back to the ship, the air was thick with tension. The planet itself seemed to be reacting to the arrival of these ancient beings, and Seraph could feel the weight of the situation settling over him like an unavoidable storm. The woman, who had warned him moments ago, stood motionless in the chaos. She didn't move as the tremors shook the earth. Her gaze was fixed on the light, and in her eyes, Seraph saw something he couldn't quite place. Fear, yes, but also acceptance. She knew something that he didn't, and that knowledge was not just a burden. It was a weight that had been passed down to her people for generations. "Why aren't you coming?" Seraph called out, his voice rising over the din of crumbling earth. She turned slowly, as though the effort required to move was almost too much. "There's no escape for me now," she said quietly, her words heavy with finality. "They won't let me go. They've been watching me for years. Watching all of us. The moment you arrived, you awakened them. And now they'll have their reckoning." Seraph's gut twisted. He had always prided himself on the Empire's superiority, its unmatched technology and military might. But now, as he watched the very planet ripple with energy, the certainty that the Empire had all the answers began to slip away. The humans weren't simply fighting to survive. They were fighting to protect something far older and more dangerous than the Empire's empire could ever fathom. "Who are they?" Seraph asked again, his patience wearing thin. His officers were already preparing the Vexor for launch, but the constant barrage of power from the surface made every move feel like an eternity. "They are ancient guardians," the woman replied, her voice strained, as though speaking the words took everything out of her. "They have lived beneath the surface of Earth for eons. They've seen empires rise and fall, civilizations burn themselves out, but they've always remained hidden, waiting for the right moment to reawaken. And now that you've triggered their signal, they're coming." Seraph's brow furrowed. "Guardians of what?" She took a step forward, her face almost expressionless, as though the battle had already been lost in her heart. "Guardians of Earth. Of its power. Of its core. They are older than your empire, older than any race you've ever encountered. The humans have been their wardens, their stewards, for millennia. We didn't just survive on this planet. We were meant to protect it from the very thing you brought here, the Empire." A deep sense of dread filled Seraph's chest. This was more than an invasion. The very idea that the Empire was facing something older and more powerful than itself, something buried deep within the planet, shook him to his core. This wasn't just about conquering Earth. It was about surviving it. Another violent tremor ripped through the ground, this one more intense than the last. The sky above seemed to crack open as waves of energy cascaded down from the swirling vortex, a blinding flash of light that momentarily blinded Seraph and his officers. When his vision returned, the woman was gone. She had disappeared into the shadows, as if swallowed by the very planet she had sworn to protect. "Captain," one of his officers shouted from the ship's hatch, "we're being targeted. Weapon systems are charging. Something is locking onto us." Seraph's heart pounded in his chest. The Vexor was at the mercy of something far beyond their understanding. He had no illusions now. These guardians were no myth. They were real, and they were coming for the Empire. "Ready all defenses," Seraph barked, his voice barely a command over the growing noise. The Vexor's weapon systems hummed to life, but it was clear that even the Empire's might was a mere spark in the face of the cosmic forces that were now awakening beneath their feet. There was no time to regroup. There was no time to question the orders he had given. They had already failed. The ground quaked again, and the sky above seemed to explode into fire, as massive figures emerged from the light, towering shapes that glowed with an otherworldly energy. They were unlike anything Seraph had ever seen, part organic, part energy, shifting and pulsating like living creatures woven together with the threads of the universe itself. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the atmosphere, reverberating with power that felt like it was vibrating within Seraph's very bones. "The reckoning begins, Captain of the Empire." Seraph felt his blood run cold. These beings were not here for negotiation. They were here to end the Empire's presence on Earth. "Get us out of here," Seraph shouted to the helm, but it was already too late. The energy from the Guardians began to converge on the Vexor, and within moments, the ship's shields began to buckle under the pressure. Sereth's grip tightened on the command chair as he realized the Empire was no longer in control. The humans' warnings had been clear, but now they were a distant memory, lost in the face of an awakening power far beyond their reach. The reckoning had begun. The energy pulse slammed into the Vexor, the ship's shields flickering violently, as if they were paper being torn apart by an invisible force. Sereth's grip tightened on the command console, his eyes flickering to the rapidly shifting holographic displays that showed the impending destruction of his vessel. His officers scrambled to maintain control, but nothing they did seemed to matter. The Guardians had arrived, and the Empire's might was little more than a whisper in the face of their overwhelming power. The ship shuddered again as a second, more concentrated blast from the ground sent the Vexor spiraling. The engines sputtered and groaned under the strain, and alarms blared from every corner of the bridge. "Captain, we're losing power. Shields at 15% and dropping," one of his officers shouted. Sereth could hear the desperation in his voice. It was over. There was no retreat. The Vexor was no match for the ancient Guardians now descending from the swirling vortex in the sky. The Empire's weapons, its tactics, its superiority. All of it was meaningless before beings who had watched civilizations rise and fall over eons. And now, Earth had awakened them, a force far beyond anything the Empire could understand or control. But Sereth wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," he ordered, though he knew it wouldn't matter. There was no escape from the tide of energy sweeping toward them. No escape from the reckoning that had arrived. The Guardians had decided. Earth was no longer a target. It was the last bastion of power, and the Empire had become the invader. "Captain, we can't outrun them," another officer said, his voice tinged with panic. "We need tow." Before he could finish, the entire ship lurched violently as another wave of energy, stronger than the first, struck with pinpoint accuracy, targeting the Vexor's engine core. The ship groaned, its hull beginning to bend under the immense pressure. Sparks flew from the console, and the lights flickered. The Vexor was dying. Sereth stumbled to his feet, his mind racing. The Guardians weren't here to destroy Earth. They were here to eliminate the threat the Empire posed to the natural balance. And as much as Sereth hated to admit it, the Empire had made a grave mistake in underestimating this world. Earth had not been an insignificant, isolated planet. It had been home to something far greater, something that had been waiting for the right moment to emerge, and the Empire had given them that moment. The voice of the Guardian from the sky resonated again, deeper now, as if it were coming from every direction at once. "You are not welcome here, Captain of the Empire. Your kind has trespassed on sacred ground. You have awakened what should have remained asleep." Sereth clenched his fists, fury bubbling inside him, but he knew that anger would accomplish nothing. The situation had spun out of his control, and there was no force, no technology, that could alter the outcome. It was a reckoning, not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy. The Empire had ruled for centuries without ever truly understanding the depths of its enemies. Now, they would learn the hard way. We failed," Sereth whispered to himself, the weight of the words sinking in. His mind flashed back to the human woman, the one who had warned him. She had spoken the truth. The Empire had awakened something they could not fight, and the price would be steep. As the Vexor's hull began to crack and twist from the pressure, Sereth looked out of the viewport, his eyes locking on the massive figures descending from the sky. The Guardians were not just a force of destruction. They were a force of nature itself, powered by the life of Earth. And now, as their glowing forms closed in, Sereth knew that this was only the beginning. The Empire's arrogance had brought them here, and now the galaxy would feel the consequences. In that moment, Sereth understood the true cost of imperial expansion. The Empire's reach had been vast, but it had been blind. The galaxy was filled with forces beyond their comprehension, forces that had existed long before the Empire even knew what stars were to conquer. And now those forces were awake, and the Empire would learn that no power, no matter how great, could stand against the balance of nature. The Vexor shuddered one final time before the lights flickered out completely. The Guardians had made their statement. The reckoning was complete. And in the silence that followed, Sereth realized the most terrible truth. The Empire had been a fleeting shadow, and the galaxy was about to enter a new era, one that no one, not even the most powerful of empires, could control. Earth had its protectors now, and they would not be silenced again.